The room smells like beeswax and dust. You sit near the fire, not quite touching its warmth, as the dying embers cast soft shadows across the paneled walls. It's late. The kind of late where clocks slow down just to taunt you. Outside, the gas lights flicker in the Philadelphia mist, and inside, the grandfather clock in the hallway ticks gently tock, 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 like a heartbeat that forgot to hurry. You're in a house on Market Street, and upstairs, Benjamin Franklin is very much alive, but not for long. He's 79 years old. His legs are swollen. His gout has gout, and yet somehow his mind is sharper than ever. Around him, the Constitutional Convention rumbles on. Great men argue about government rights, sovereignty. But Franklin mostly listens now. In fact, tonight, he's alone in his study writing something by candlelight, no less, even though he helped bring electricity into the world. The irony doesn't bother him. He dips his quill, pauses. Somewhere far away, George Washington is trying not to cry in front of Congress. Hamilton is probably dueling with someone over comma placement. Jefferson is still rewriting a sentence for the 8th time because it doesn't sound sufficiently Roman. But Franklin? He's thinking about chairs. Not just any chair, the one George Washington has been sitting in for months at the head of the Constitutional Hall. It's carved from mahogany grand, but not overly ornate. On the high back, just behind Washington's powdered wig, is a carving a sun low on the horizon. For weeks now, Franklin has stared at that sun wondering, is it rising or is it setting? There's no guarantee that this new Constitution will hold. The country is broke, angry, and fractious. People say the states are like 13 clocks all striking different hours, and yet they keep meeting and talking and rewriting. You listen as Franklin chuckles softly to himself, as if amused by the whole mess. The chair, the Constitution, the young men desperate to fix everything with words. He doesn't interrupt often anymore, but when he does, people lean in. Earlier today, he stood tried to stand and made one final speech delivered by a proxy because standing hurts too much now. But his words made the room still. Thus I consent, sir, the speech read to this Constitution, because I expect no better, and because I am not sure that it is not the best. A pause. The older I grow, he continued, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and to pay more respect to the judgment of others. This is not what young revolutionaries expect to hear. Doubt deference. Where's the firebrand Franklin, the man who once warned kings to their faces and chased storms with a key and string? You sip your tea, lukewarm now, and lean further into the chair as the fire cracks. The window rattles in its frame, but the room is otherwise silent. Even your breath has softened. Now here's the part most people miss. Franklin could have had it all. Truly, president easily. He had the mind, the stature, the mythology. Washington himself said Franklin commanded respect of all men. But when the idea was floated, when delegates whispered, "Should we ask him?" Franklin declined. Politely, firmly. Why? Well, maybe his body was tired. The man had been in more courts than powdered wigs. He'd crossed the Atlantic more times than most ships. His bladder was unreliable. His bones hurt in the cold. But that's not the full answer. He just didn't want it. Franklin never lusted for titles. He preferred ideas. In fact, when pressed, he once said, "A republic if you can keep it." That's what he gave them, a structure, not a throne. Tonight in the candlelight, he scratches another line in his notebook. This one a private joke about delegates bickering over commas while the Union might collapse. It's funny in that dry Franklin way. He always believed laughter could survive anything, even a failing democracy. You shift in your chair, tugging the blanket a little tighter. The wax drips slower now, a sign that the room is cooling. Outside, a dog barks once, then stops. Inside, the air holds its breath. Now you picture Franklin in his dressing gown. Linen striped a little loose. His hair is sparse, but he still powders it out of habit. He moves with a shuffle, one hand on the edge of the table for balance. Every step reminds him of time. He doesn't fight it anymore. He opens the window, yes, even in the cold. He believed fresh air was a medicine even at midnight, especially at midnight. He believed in air baths, in letting the body breathe without clothing for at least 20 minutes a day. The neighbors found it eccentric. He found it reasonable. Franklin lights a second candle and places it on the sill beside a pile of folded letters. The flames flicker together, twins in conversation. You see his eyes reflect the light, and for a moment, just a moment, he seems impossibly young again. But that's just an illusion. He is old, and time is winning. As he turns back toward his desk, the floor creaks. Every sound in the house now feels sacred. You half expect to hear voices from the next room, Jefferson complaining that the windows leak or Madison sketching another clause, but no, it's just you and Franklin and the cold. He picks up another page, this one a draft, half-written, scribbled, full of strike-throughs and crossings out. His handwriting has grown shaky. The ink blotches more than it used to. Still, he pushes on, always writing, always tinkering. He once said, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. And here he is, still trying to do both. You wonder what he's writing tonight. Perhaps a letter to his daughter Sarah, asking after the grandchildren, or a final essay on governance, or just a list of things to repair around the house. Maybe it doesn't matter. The point is, he's not seeking power. He's putting things in order, quietly, thoughtfully, without applause. And that's how you know Franklin was never going to be president. Because for him, that wasn't the point. The point was the conversation, the experiment, the community, the electricity between people, not just between clouds. He believed in institutions that could outlive egos. He believed in books that could survive fire. He believed in laughter during revolutions and libraries in a nation of farmers. He believed in sleep, for heaven's sake. The man once wrote, "Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise." You suspect he didn't always follow that rule himself, but he liked the rhythm. Now the fire is nearly gone. The candlelight dances on the ceiling. Franklin's breath is slow and steady. You can almost hear it just beneath the ticking of that old grandfather clock. Tuck, tuck, tuck. He sets down the quill. The Constitution is done. The chair, he's decided it's a rising sun. And as you close your eyes curled in the warmth of this quiet room, you realize something: you may never know the end of this story. You may drift off before Franklin finishes even one more sentence. But that's okay. He would have understood. Because even as the world was rewriting itself, Franklin knew that rest was revolutionary too. If you like this space and want to see me again on future nights, please like and follow. We have many more nights to tell stories together. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I'll be reading them under candlelight. Now, take a deep breath. Feel the quiet. Let the clock tick without urgency. And listen. Because the story continues. Before the spectacles and the silence. Before the declarations and the diplomacy. Before lightning danced on strings and nations rose on parchment. There was just a boy. And not a particularly remarkable-looking one. You're crouching barefoot at the edge of a muddy inlet near Boston. It's 1712. The air smells like seaweed and salt, and your breath is tight from running. There's a soft splash. Benjamin Franklin, all of 6 years old, slips into the water without hesitation. It's cold, sharp, bracing. He doesn't flinch. Why would he? He's already invented something: wooden paddles strapped to his hands like flippers. Not elegant, but effective. He kicks forward like a tiny otter, testing the water, slicing through it in bursts. The other children laugh from the shore, but Benjamin doesn't hear them. Not because they're quiet, but because his mind is elsewhere. Already, you dry your feet in the grass and watch him tumble through the current, a small, stubborn shape in the tide. He's obsessed with movement, with fluidity, with understanding how things work. Even now, there's a hunger in him, not for food or praise, but for explanation. Franklin's home is a furnace of noise. 17 children, one soap-maker father, a narrow house stuffed with too many elbows and too little space. You imagine yourself inside that crowded kitchen, dodging a swinging ladle, trying not to trip on siblings. It's no wonder Benjamin slips away to the harbor when he can. The water listens. It doesn't talk over him. He doesn't speak much at home. But he reads. Oh, how he reads. At age 8, he's devouring Pilgrim's Progress. At 9, he's copying essays to do good by Cotton Mather word for word, just to feel how it moves. He's not taught to question authority. But he does. When his parents suggest a future in the clergy, he politely declines with a firm, peculiar certainty that makes his father squint. Who is this boy? You can imagine Josiah Franklin muttering under his breath as Benjamin scribbles Latin for fun. His mind leaps ahead of his body. He teaches himself geometry, music, even chess. Not through lectures or tutors, just books. Just sheer, unrelenting curiosity. And then comes the ink. You sit beside young Ben in his brother James's print shop. The air is thick with the scent of type metal and oil. He is 11 years old and already elbow deep in a business older boys can't grasp. He sets type, mixes ink, sharpens the blades, and at night he writes. Secretly. Because James, older and often angry, won't let him publish under his real name. So Benjamin invents Silence Dogood, a fictional middle-aged widow with sharp wit and sharper opinions. Through her, he critiques the government, the clergy, and the silliness of Boston society, all anonymously. You chuckle as he slips another letter under the shop door, pretending to be someone else entirely. He's playing a game, yes, but also shaping a voice. A bold one, a mischievous one that will become unmistakable. When James discovers the ruse, he is unsurprisingly not amused, and so Benjamin runs away. Literally. At age 17, he walks out of Boston with a spare shirt and a few coins. No job, no contacts, no plans, just ideas. You follow him down the winding road to Philadelphia. His shoes fall apart. He sleeps on boats. He gets sick. He arrives disheveled, dirty, and carrying, no joke, a loaf of bread under each arm. And yet, he looks up. He always looks up. In fact, within weeks, he has a job, then another, then another. Within months, he's networking with governors and printers, debating philosophers in taverns, and flirting with women twice his age. He's charming, a little manipulative, but mostly curious. Franklin believes he can become better, smarter, wiser, and he does it the only way he knows how, by studying himself like an experiment. This is the part where things get a little odd. You flip through his private notebooks and find lists, endless lists of virtues. He wants to be more temperate, more frugal, more humble, and he scores himself on each one every day. Imagine that, waking up and grading your own soul, not out of guilt, but out of design. He even invents his own moral perfection calendar. Because of course he does. Meanwhile, other boys his age are trying not to get drafted or drinking away their futures. Franklin is writing aphorisms like fish and visitors stink after 3 days, which honestly is still true. You catch him alone one night staring at a candle. He's not praying. He's observing the way the flame curves in wind. Then he writes something down about combustion. Then he sketches an idea for a new type of stove. Then he wonders aloud whether dreams mean anything. This is Franklin's world, always shifting between questions and contraptions. But here's what they don't tell you in textbooks. Benjamin Franklin was odd. Not in a dangerous way, but in that deeply specific, quietly disruptive way that makes you uncomfortable if you're too conventional. He bathed naked, often, in front of open windows. He once wrote an essay on the health benefits of passing gas. He argued that older women made better lovers, yes, really, and listed reasons alphabetically. He slept only 4 hours a night, or 10, depending on the season. He believed cold air cured everything and walked around in winter with his shirt open just to prove it. He thought music could realign brain waves and once tried to play water glasses like a piano until a woman fainted from the sound. Franklin was brilliant, yes, but also deeply endearingly strange. Still, the world needed him. By his 30s, he's publishing Poor Richard's Almanac, a runaway hit. He's printing currency. He's inventing libraries. He's improving fire departments and street lighting. He's building systems that make Philadelphia run smoother, not just for the elite, but for everyone. You walk with him one morning as he steps carefully along cobblestones, inspecting gutter drains and measuring the angle of sunlight between buildings. He's not being dramatic. He's just noticing. And in that noticing, he builds. By the time Franklin is 40, he's already famous, but not yet finished, because now comes the storm, and the string, and the key. But we'll come to that. For now, just remember the boy in the harbor, splashing through salt water, giggling in the current, drenched in light and mischief. He didn't look like the man who would someday help build a country. But then again, most revolutionaries don't. You can smell the ink before you even open the door. Hot iron presses, damp paper, that faintly sweet, slightly sour scent of boiled linseed oil. Inside the shop, a young man in rolled-up sleeves moves like clockwork. Not frantically, but methodically. This is his orchestra, and he is both conductor and percussionist. You step over a tray of metal-type duck beneath a swinging drying line, and there he is, Benjamin Franklin, in his late 20s now. Taller than you'd pictured, hair disheveled, fingers stained deep with black ink, and that grin. It's a grin that suggests he's either about to print a sermon or an absolute roast of the governor. You're not sure which. He's not telling. This is the world Franklin built for himself, the print shop, his real kingdom. He never wore a crown, never held office yet. From this room, he would influence more minds than half the politicians in the colonies combined. And he does it with paper. You hear the press groan and hiss as he pulls another sheet from the platen. On it, another edition of the Pennsylvania Gazette, his personal megaphone. Half news, half satire, half editorial rant, yes, 3 halves. Franklin rarely played by math rules. He used it to praise, criticize, joke, debate, and occasionally just entertain himself. He could be serious, of course, calling for colonial unity, warning against foreign debt, but he preferred to write with a wink. For example, when once accused of excessive vanity, he printed a fictional letter from an old widow who claimed Franklin was too ugly to be conceited. His response, "Madam, your flattery overwhelms me." You shuffle closer as he sets type for Poor Richard's almanac. His runaway bestseller filled with weather predictions, farming tips, and pithy aphorisms like, "A penny saved is a penny earned." He sold tens of thousands of copies in an era when most colonists couldn't even afford socks. But here's the twist. Most of the advice Franklin gave, he didn't follow. He warned against pride but craved approval. He preached frugality but loved French wine. He told people to rise early but often stayed up past midnight studying musical scales or sketching ideas for a new heating stove. He even advised against idleness, yet kept an entire cabinet of tiny mechanical gadgets purely for fidgeting. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was humanity. Franklin didn't pretend to be perfect, he just wanted to aim in that direction. Now imagine this: every morning before the sun rose, Franklin sat in silence for 5 minutes. Not praying exactly, not meditating, just thinking. Sometimes about layout spacing, sometimes about death, sometimes about how to convince people to clean their chimneys. In that silence, he developed a list of 13 virtues, a personal code of improvement. Temperance, resolution, sincerity. Each day he would track his failures with tiny black marks in a notebook. The goal, moral perfection. Spoiler alert, he never got there. But he came closer than most. You see, Franklin didn't want to control people. He wanted to influence them, gently, with humor, with example, with really sharp one-liners. One of his favorite rhetorical moves, writing as someone else, under a pseudonym, of course. He invented dozens of fake names. Silence Dogood, Busybody, Richard Saunders. Even Polly Baker, a fictional woman who stood trial for having children out of wedlock, and delivered a fiery courtroom speech about male hypocrisy. Some readers thought she was real, others just clapped. Franklin used humor like a scalpel, sharp, unassuming, often disarming. You imagine him chuckling behind the press as colonists argued over whether Polly Baker was a real person or a national disgrace. Meanwhile, Franklin just re-inked the rollers and moved on to the next issue. But don't mistake his wit for whimsy. He built serious systems, real things. You walk beside him one evening as he locks up the shop and strolls through the streets of Philadelphia, lantern in hand. There's no fire brigade yet, so he'll help organize one. There's no decent hospital, so he'll fund one. No subscription library, he'll start one from scratch. Even the postal system, so unreliable before, will run like clockwork under his hand. Franklin wasn't a politician. He was a civic architect. He understood that power didn't always come from ballots or battalions. Sometimes it came from infrastructure, from lighting a street lamp, from keeping books dry, from printing 1,000 ideas and letting them flutter into the world. And he loved letting them flutter. You reach into a worn leather folder near his desk and find old drafts, each signed with initials only he could decode. One is a half-written essay about human happiness and the pursuit thereof. Another is a satire mocking British aristocrats. Yet another is just a sketch of a 2-level desk with built-in drawers for snacks. That last one, if you're being honest, is brilliant. But Franklin also knew when to push, when to prod, when to poke the bear. During rising tensions with Britain, he published cartoons showing dismembered snakes representing the disunited colonies. Join or die, the caption read. Simple, direct, effective. People remembered. And when colonial leaders debated whether to risk war, Franklin didn't grandstand. He cracked jokes, wrote letters, and quietly built alliances between factions. He knew the value of soft power, of backroom whispers, of well-timed silences. In fact, one of his greatest talents wasn't what he said, it was what he chose not to say. He'd been burned before. Take the time he tried to broker peace between Britain and the colonies. He sailed to London, pled his case, was mocked in Parliament, and left humiliated. That's when something in him shifted. That's when he stopped trying to patch the old system and began dreaming of a new one. A quieter rage burned beneath the jokes now, but even then he didn't shout. He printed, and people listened. You look up from your seat by the press. The shop is dark now, quiet. A breeze pushes against the shutters. The ink is cold. The pages are dry. But the words are still there. Franklin's legacy wasn't forged in battles or elections. It was forged in sentences, in commas, in the slow rhythm of the press. Crank, hiss, thump, repeat. He taught a generation how to read, then how to question, then how to build. And when people asked him years later why he never wanted to run the country he helped shape, he simply smiled. You get the feeling he already had, in his own way. You're standing in a gilded salon somewhere in the middle of Paris. The ceiling is higher than most buildings you've ever lived in, and there's gold leaf curling around every corner like vines that forgot they weren't alive. A chandelier the size of a small carriage glimmers overhead. You're dressed too plainly for this place. Everyone is. Everyone except Benjamin Franklin. He's sitting in a red velvet chair, legs crossed, sipping wine like he was born here, which of course he wasn't. But Paris doesn't care. The Parisians don't care. They love him. And why? Because he wears a fur hat indoors. That's not a joke. Franklin arrived in France in 1776 wearing a raccoon fur cap and a simple brown coat. While other ambassadors polished their boots and cleared their throats, Franklin strolled into Versailles like he was on a coffee break. He didn't dress up because he didn't have to. His reputation arrived before he did. The French called him le philosophe. Some whispered le magicien. Many simply called him Franklin, as if he were a brand of tea. In their eyes, he was the embodiment of noble simplicity. The rustic genius, the Enlightenment in breeches. You walk beside him through Versailles, dodging powdered wigs and skirts wider than doorways. Franklin nods to artists, chats with philosophers, and chuckles with duchesses. There's something magnetic about him, though, not in the way that made others uncomfortable. His charm is low frequency, like a cello. You feel it more than hear it. And the hat. The hat becomes legend. Parisians begin to wear similar caps just to seem wise. Franklin dolls out polite shrugs and sly winks as if to say, it's just a hat. But he knows better. He's using it. Always has been. Image is leverage. But Franklin isn't in France to attend soirees or outshine philosophers. He's here for revolution. America needs allies, desperately. Supplies, ships, soldiers, anything to keep the fragile rebellion from crumbling. The Continental Congress sends Franklin to secure an alliance with France, a monarchic empire known mostly for wine wigs and losing naval battles. No pressure. And yet, he delivers. Not with armies, not with threats, but with presence. You listen to him at dinner, speaking French slowly, deliberately, with just enough mistakes to seem humble. He quotes Voltaire, laughs at dirty jokes, shares lightning stories over duck confit. He knows exactly when to speak and when to pretend not to understand. It works. By 1778, France signs a formal alliance with the United States. It's one of the most consequential diplomatic victories in world history. and it was won by a man who preferred writing essays to giving speeches. A man who knew the power of being in the room. And what a room it was. You tiptoe through the Hôtel de Valentinois, where Franklin lived in Passy. It's a peculiar household. There are couriers at all hours, scientists dropping by with new experiments, nobles arriving with fruit baskets and petitions. At one point, the King of Sweden just shows up. And yet Franklin remains grounded. He plays the glass harmonica, a musical instrument he invented using tuned spinning bowls. The sound is eerie, like ghosts singing under glass. Marie Antoinette requests lessons. Franklin obliges, though, with a smirk. He doesn't think much of monarchy or powdered hair. He writes letters, hundreds of them by candlelight, to Congress, to his family, to philosophers, to strangers, some serious, some scathing, many playful. His correspondence becomes its own genre, part philosophy, part gossip, part bedtime story. And when he runs out of ink, he makes his own. He also flirts, a lot. Not in a scandalous way, but in that gentle, eyebrow-raising, paper fan fluttering way that drives Parisian salons into a frenzy. He's old, well into his 70s, but still sharp, still witty. Some women describe him as delicious. Others just want to see if the rumors are true. You peek at one of his letters to Madame Brillant, written half in French, half in poetry, and realize he's still a teenager inside. One who happens to speak Latin, but not all is candlelight and charm. Franklin faces doubts from Congress. Critics say he's too cozy with the French, too indulgent, too slow. He shrugs it off, but the letters sting. He's tired. His gout is worse. The winters bite harder, and war still rages across the ocean. Still, he persists. He negotiates, carefully, patiently, over years, until 1783. That's when Franklin helps draft and sign the Treaty of Paris, the document that officially ends the Revolutionary War. No battlefield, no cannons, just a room, a pen, and Franklin steadying his hand despite the pain. You imagine him looking up as the ink dries, watching the British envoy's face. No triumph, no malice, just history shifting quietly. He's done what few thought possible. He helped birth a nation with a smile and a raccoon cap. You walk with him one final time through the streets of Passy, where locals tip their hats, children shout his name, and bakers wave from windows. He doesn't stride, he floats. Not because of pride, but because his legs hurt too much to walk fast. He's going home now, back to Philadelphia. To the place where clocks tick slowly and fireplaces whisper secrets. To the country he helped create. But part of him will stay here in France, in the wine, in the music, in the quiet revolution of manners. After all, Franklin knew something most diplomats never learn, that revolutions aren't just won with swords. Sometimes they're won with presence. And a very peculiar hat. The room is still again. Same old Market Street. Same worn floorboards. But now Benjamin Franklin is home. Older, slower, and surrounded by men who think they're about to offer him the highest honor of his life. You hear the soft knock on the study door. 3 delegates enter, hats in hand, voices lowered. They don't ask directly. Of course not. That's not how power is handed out in this new republic. They offer compliments, gratitude, noble phrases about wisdom and stability and trust. But the meaning is clear. They want Franklin to be the first president of the United States. You wait, breath held, imagining a flicker in his old eyes. A quiet sigh. A surprised thank you, maybe. Or even just a nod. But none of that happens. He smiles, tilts his head, and says something that sounds like a joke. "I'm flattered, but I've already been King of France once. That's quite enough." They chuckle, not sure if he's serious, but he is. You watch as the moment slips away like steam off tea. The idea of Franklin as president gone just like that. No debate, no drama. Just a warm refusal in a room too quiet for its own weight. Why, it wasn't just age, though. Franklin was tired. He was pushing 80, and every stare felt like a betrayal. His gout made even socks painful. He needed help dressing. He slept little, wrote less. He was in every visible way nearing the end. But that's not why he said no. He said no because he believed in something bigger than himself. Franklin didn't fight for power. He fought for structure, balance, restraint. The idea that a republic could function without any one man being essential, even him. You remember how he signed the Constitution, but only after noting that while he didn't agree with every word, he agreed with the idea of consensus. "I expect no better," he said, "and I'm not sure that it is not the best." That wasn't cynicism. It was humility weaponized into statesmanship. Franklin feared something, the creeping shadow of monarchy. Even if the new president didn't wear a crown, the danger remained. Reverence could rot into obedience, fame into worship. He'd seen it happen in France, in England, even in ancient Rome, studied by candlelight in his youth. And he feared it might happen here. If he accepted the presidency, it would set a tone. A philosopher king, a saint with spectacles. People would look to his words instead of their laws, and the republic would become personality-driven, fragile, unstable, and so he declined. With a smile, a quip. And then he went back to editing an essay about cooling houses with cross-ventilation. You walk beside him a few days later through the streets of Philadelphia. He leans on an aide, nods at street vendors. His body bends with age, but his mind is still sprinting. He murmurs about decimal time daylight saving and something called a bifocal monocle. You can't keep up. "Mr. Franklin," someone calls. They say Washington may accept the job. The presidency. Franklin pauses, then shrugs. He doesn't want it either, he says. Which is exactly why he should have it. There it is again, that sideways wisdom. The idea that power should be avoided, not pursued. That the best leaders are those who aren't asking to be crowned. You reach his doorstep. He turns slowly. The wind picks up, tossing a few fallen leaves across the cobblestones. And he says something you'll never forget. "I've already held the most important office this country offers, citizen." Then he disappears inside. That word citizen meant everything to Franklin. He once wrote, "The public is not the enemy of the private man, but his own soul in crowd form." To serve that public, to build something for them, that was the point. You sit with him that night as he writes by lamplight. Not speeches, not laws, but small ideas. Notes on municipal lighting. Margins of essays with jokes scribbled between Latin phrases. An unfinished treatise on thrift with a doodle of a squirrel in the corner. He hums while he writes. Occasionally coughs. The air smells like scorched oil and lemon peel. The fire pops softly, like it's agreeing with him. Somewhere outside, a young man is celebrating. Perhaps Jefferson, perhaps Madison, perhaps a neighbor who just installed one of Franklin's improved stoves. Whoever it is, they don't yet realize the cost of leadership. Franklin does. He's seen ambition hollow out brilliant men. seen it distort reason, amplify fear, make petty grievances into policies. Power is a magnifier, he once said. It enlarges not the man, but the man's flaws. And so he turned it down. Not because he lacked confidence, but because he had it. True confidence doesn't need a title. It doesn't need applause. It sits quietly in a chair made of walnut, scribbling in the margins of history content, to let someone else deliver the speech. You look at Franklin's desk again. Notice how it's cluttered, but never chaotic. Letters piled under pamphlets. An old kite string looped around a pen. A cracked glass harmonica covered by a towel. All remnants of a man who touched everything but claimed nothing. And as the night settles in and the sounds of the city soften into hush, you feel it. Franklin's greatest act of leadership may have been not leading, because in walking away, he let the country rise on its own, without a king, without a saint, without a Franklin in the big chair. Just a republic, if it could keep itself. There's an alleyway in Philadelphia that doesn't look like much. Cobblestone path, a chipped wooden bench, a couple of crooked lampposts, and a sign that leans slightly in the wind. Tourists shuffle past, mostly unaware. But if you sit there long enough, quiet enough, you start to feel something. This is where Franklin's fingerprints remain. Not on plaques or monuments, but in the mundane, the ordinary, the infrastructure of life. You walk through the city at dawn. It's too early for crowds. The air smells like fresh bread and something vaguely metallic. Streetlights buzz low. Somewhere a street sweeper yawns into his gloves. You look down, and there on the sidewalk is a brass marker for the Philadelphia Library Company. Founded by, you guessed it, Ben Franklin. Because of course he built a library. He didn't just donate books. He didn't hoard tomes in a dusty personal study. He built a subscription library, one where citizens could share resources, raid ideas, learn without pedigree. In a time when most knowledge was locked behind wealth or university walls, Franklin simply opened a door. But it wasn't the only door he opened. You round a corner and pass a neat brick building with white shutters. It was once a firehouse, the first volunteer fire department in the colonies. Franklin didn't like how fires destroyed property and how often they were made worse by untrained neighbors. So he created a system: buckets, rotating schedules, communication networks. If you wanted to help, you trained. Simple. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. That was his gift. Seeing chaos and offering systems. You glance up and notice a lightning rod on a chapel. Franklin again. In a world where lightning was still seen as divine judgment, he dared to tame it. Not with defiance, but with understanding. The rod wasn't just invention, it was order, a calm hand in the face of destruction. You step into a narrow courtyard and find another relic, Pennsylvania Hospital. The first in America. Before it, the sick were mostly left to rot. Franklin helped raise the funds quietly, pragmatically, convincing merchants that health served everyone. He never bragged, never demanded his name on a wing, just made sure it got built. He did the same with street lighting. Before Franklin, colonial streets were dark and dangerous after sunset. Crime thrived in shadows. Accidents happened constantly. So he designed a new lamp, four-sided glass, with air holes to reduce soot, and convinced the city to install them. And then there was the postal system. Before Franklin, mail delivery was erratic, slow, and easily lost. As Postmaster General, he cut delivery times in half, created standard routes, introduced home delivery. By the time he was done, the colonies had the most advanced mail system in the Western world. Again, not glory, just function. You rest on a bench beside a small plaque about Franklin's stove. A simple fireplace redesign that used less wood and gave off more heat. He never patented it, said it belonged to the public. As we enjoy great advantages from the inventions of others, he wrote, we should be glad to serve others by any invention of ours. He believed in public domain before it had a name. He believed in shared progress, and you wonder how many lives warmed their hands by that stove. How many children read by the light of Franklin's lamps? How many letters carried courage across states thanks to his postal reforms? It wasn't about legacy, it was about momentum. But here's something stranger. In his will, Franklin did something unusual. He left money to the cities of Philadelphia and Boston, not just to be spent, but to be invested, compounded for 200 years. He believed that time was the ultimate multiplier, that good would grow quietly, invisibly, if you just gave it patience. And he was right. When the funds were finally released in the 1990s, they had grown into millions, used to fund scholarships, apprenticeships, and education. A man who died in 1790 was still paying tuition for kids 2 centuries later. He thought in centuries. That's rare. And what else did he leave behind? Not just structures, but habits. Franklin didn't build a country. He built the daily functions that allow countries to exist. Literacy, communication, public health, fire safety, civic organization. Things so basic you almost forget they had to be invented. You sip a warm drink now and watch the city wake. Delivery trucks rumble past. Streetlights blink off one by one. A jogger ties her shoes by a statue of Franklin, ironically a man who would have preferred a bench to a pedestal. You wonder if he'd be proud, not of the politics, not of the spectacle, but of the continuity. The fact that things still hum, that libraries still loan, that letters still arrive, that buildings still warm. His greatest creations were boring and therefore indispensable. And maybe that's the point. Not every legacy needs a trumpet. Some just need a doorbell that works. You lean back, the sun crests over the rooftops, and you think about one more odd thing. Franklin had a peculiar clause in his will. He left instructions that Boston, his birthplace, not his adopted home, should use its share of his estate only for public improvements. Why Boston? Because he wanted to give something back to the place that never quite understood him. The place he ran away from. The place that never asked him to be president, but gave him the itch to change things. He turned teenage exile into lifelong service. Because sometimes the best way to prove a point is quietly. The light inside the house has changed. Dimmer now. Softer. It filters through the curtains like tea seeping into warm water, slow, gentle, patient. You're sitting in a chair that creaks too easily across from a man who's outlived almost everyone he knew, and yet there's still something mischievous behind his tired eyes. Benjamin Franklin is dying. Not quickly, not tragically, just inevitably. The way old oak trees fall, not from one storm, but from 1,000 seasons. And as you sit with him in his final months, you begin to understand the part of Franklin most people skip. The messy part, the human part. You've heard the stories, the inventions, the aphorisms, the charm, but you haven't yet seen the contradictions, the loose ends, the murky pages in the biography. He had them. Start with William, Franklin's son. illegitimate born before his marriage, raised as his own, loved, taught, mentored, and then lost, not to death, but to politics. William became a loyalist devoted to the British crown, and when the revolution broke out, father and son stood on opposite sides of history. Franklin begged him to reconsider. William refused. The breach never healed. Franklin disowned him, refused to see him, cut him out of the will. He could forgive enemies, but not betrayal. Was he right? Historians still debate it. But here's what's undeniable: when William tried to write him later, Franklin never replied. Silence became the final word. You glance toward Franklin's writing desk. There among the letters and pamphlets is a stack of unopened mail. Some are from old friends, a few from critics. One may even be from William. Franklin never said, but not all his secrets are sealed in envelopes. Take his years in France. He was adored there, yes, but also watched. Rumors swirled. He spent long afternoons with women, not his wife, though his wife had already passed. Some letters hinted at flirtation, others at more. Franklin joked about it. "I grow old, but I'm not dead," he once quipped to a friend. Some scholars say he was merely charming. Others say he was more. We'll never know. The letters are charmingly vague. You think back to Deborah, his common-law wife of 44 years. He left for England in 1757, promising to return soon. He stayed away for 15 years. She never joined him. They wrote, but something changed. By the time he returned, she was dying. He sat by her bed, held her hand, said little. Regret perhaps doesn't need words. And then there's the matter of the bones. Yes, actual bones. In 1998, renovations at Franklin's former London residence uncovered a secret. Under the garden, buried beneath stone and soil, were the remains of at least 10 bodies. Adults, children, some dismembered. Sensational headlines followed. Was Franklin a murderer, a grave robber? The truth was probably less gothic, but no less strange. One of Franklin's close friends, William Hewson, was an early anatomist. He likely used the house for dissection, which was illegal at the time. Franklin must have known. He lived there for years. He never said a word about it. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he believed in science above scandal. Maybe he just compartmentalized everything the way he always had, tucking inconvenient truths behind larger goals. Still, bones in the basement. Not everyone's legacy includes that. You stand now and walk slowly through the house. Franklin's breath rattles in the other room. Not in distress, just like wind through a hollow flute. His writing hand is gnarled, his eyes cloudy, but his wit still sharp. When Thomas Jefferson visits, Franklin offers a sly comment about needing more commas and fewer kings. Jefferson smiles. Franklin winks, and then back to the silence. But something's different. He's writing less now. No more long essays, no more witty pamphlets, just short letters, phrases, a final message to George Washington, thanking him for his service and politely declining an invitation to dine. My legs are not what they were, he writes, and my appetite even less so. He's tired. You find a final draft of his autobiography near the window. It ends abruptly. Not because he ran out of stories, but because he didn't believe in endings. He writes, "The unfinished life is the most honest kind." And then he rests. Philadelphia slows down. Strangers leave apples on the doorstep. Children whisper outside the window. Merchants lower their voices when walking past. And one morning, Franklin whispers his last request. He asks for a simple funeral. No grand speeches, no fancy procession. Just a walk through the streets he helped build. And when he finally passes, they come. 20,000 people, filling streets, balconies, rooftops. They don't chant, they don't shout, they just walk. Some carry lanterns, some read lines from Poor Richard's almanac, some cry. Most just walk in silence. You stand among them, one hand in your coat, the other tracing a fold of paper, a copy of one of his jokes maybe. Something about taxes or time or toads. You reach his grave. It's plain. Too plain, some say. Just his name. No epitaph. No grand declaration. But if you listen closely, beneath the wind, beneath the shuffle of shoes, you hear it. The whisper of a man who gave up power, who made libraries instead of palaces, who preferred jokes to sermons, who chose presence over prestige. You bend slightly fingers, brushing the cool stone. And in that moment, you realize the tragedy isn't that Franklin had secrets or scandals or fractures. The tragedy is that we expect our heroes to be clean. But Franklin wasn't clean. He was complicated. And that's why he mattered. You're not quite awake, not quite asleep. The room is soft around the edges. You imagine it now, a version of America that never quite happened. One where Benjamin Franklin didn't say no. One where he did become president. Let's dream for a moment. You open your eyes, and it's 1789. The Capitol is a little smaller, the paint still smells new, and the Constitution's ink hasn't fully dried. There's a soft buzz in the air. It's Inauguration Day, and there at the center of it all is Franklin. He's standing on a small platform, squinting slightly in the sunlight. His coat is simple wool with brass buttons. No sash, no ceremonial sword. But on his face, a bemused smile, as if he knows the whole thing is slightly ridiculous. The crowd leans forward as he raises his hand. The oath is spoken. He stumbles on a word and mutters, "That one's always tricky." The crowd laughs nervously. He signs the document with an ink blot big enough to blot out a clause. He shrugs. No one reads those anyway. Just like that President Benjamin Franklin. He doesn't live in the White House. It's not built yet. He prefers a row house in Philadelphia with poor insulation and excellent acoustics. His cabinet meetings are held over tea, and sometimes wine, always debate. He doesn't walk into rooms. He arrives, slowly, deliberately, sometimes barefoot. On Tuesdays, he gives speeches that sound more like jokes. "My fellow citizens," he begins, "I come to you today not as a philosopher or printer, but as a man who failed his virtue chart 3 times this week." On Thursdays, he strolls the city to check the street lamps. He insists on writing his own legislation drafts, mostly in the margins of almanacs and leftover mail. And once a month, he holds open forums where citizens can shout suggestions from the gallery. One man proposes a 4-day work week. Franklin blinks. Interesting. Let's trial it in July. And they do. But it's not all delight and clever remarks. Being president wears him down. He's old. The stairs ache. He forgets names. He writes "Dear Sir" or "Madam" more than he'd like. His aides whisper about his memory. His opponents whisper about his morals. The newspapers run cartoons of him falling asleep at briefings. He responds with a letter to the editor. "At least I nap productively." He's popular. Too popular. And that's the problem. Citizens call him Father Franklin. They put his face on wall clocks. Children memorize his proverbs like scripture. Congress hesitates to oppose him not out of respect, but reverence, which he hates. He once mutters to a friend, "I invented the lightning rod, not the lightning." The country grows, the borders stretch, and people demand decisions. Taxes, trade, slavery. Slavery. Franklin had always been ambiguous. Owned a few slaves, freed them, founded abolitionist societies, wrote essays, avoided real fights. But now he's president. He can't avoid the fights. And suddenly his wit isn't enough. He proposes a gradual abolition plan. Southern states revolt. Northern allies waver. He writes pamphlets, delivers speeches, but the tide is larger than even Franklin can surf. At night, he lies awake, not from pain, but from regret. Did he wait too long? Was silence his biggest vice? In this alternate history, you see him shrink, not from age, but from disappointment. He thought leading meant nudging. It meant standing. And Franklin never liked to stand too long. Still, he finishes his term, declines a second, gives one final address not about greatness or unity or divine providence, but about plumbing. Yes, plumbing. Civilization, he says, is a matter of clean water, clean streets, and clean consciences. If you've got none of the above, you've got trouble. The crowd is confused. He smiles. You'll get it eventually. And then quietly, he returns home. No fanfare. Just footsteps on cobblestone. In this dream, he dies not as a printer or postmaster, but as a former president. And when they bury him, the crowd is 10 times larger. The tombstone is taller. His name becomes a school, a city, a state. But somehow he feels smaller. Not because he failed, but because the myth was too big to carry. And you wake from the dream, still lying near the fire. The room is quiet again. You breathe out slowly, realizing something strange. It was better that he never wore the title, because sometimes being president limits the man. But being Franklin, that was limitless. You step off a muddy path, onto a makeshift porch, and into a cramped, smoky room. There are pamphlets everywhere, papers in piles. The floor creaks beneath your feet, and the fireplace glows like an exhausted star. In the corner, hunched over a table covered in ink stains and broken quills, is a man whose boots have been worn through more times than his patience. Thomas Paine. He's shivering slightly, not from cold, but from whatever it is that keeps certain people always on the edge. His hands move fast, scratching out words like they're too hot to hold. He doesn't glance up as you enter. And somewhere in the corner of the room, tacked to the wall, is a letter from Benjamin Franklin. You can't see the words from here, but you know what it said. It said, "Go to America." That's it. Just 4 words. But they changed everything. Paine had been a failed corset maker, a failed tax collector, a failed teacher. He was too outspoken for England, too restless for stability, too much of everything and not enough of anything else. But Franklin saw something in him. They met in London briefly. Franklin, older and already famous, read some of Paine's essays, ragged, defiant, awkward essays. But they had fire, and Franklin liked fire. He wrote him a note. "Go to America. You might do some good there." So Paine did. And he did do some good. He wrote Common Sense. You probably remember that title from a high school textbook if you weren't asleep by then. But what they don't tell you is just how radical it was. Paine didn't just criticize kings. He dismantled them. He didn't advocate for reform, he demanded revolution. He didn't hedge, didn't whisper, he shouted. Even brutes do not devour their young, he wrote. Nor do savages make war upon their own families. That wasn't an argument. That was a hammer. He published it anonymously, of course, in 1776, right when everything was teetering. The colonies weren't yet unified. Half of Philadelphia still toasted the king after dinner. People were hesitant. And then Paine's words swept through the streets like wildfire. Within months, 500,000 copies circulated across a population of just 2.5 million. That's like everyone in modern New York passing around a single blog post by candlelight. You imagine Franklin back home reading it with a grin. He hadn't written the revolution's loudest words, but he'd invited the man who did. Still, Paine was more than a one-hit pamphleteer. He kept writing. The Crisis Papers. These are the times that try men's souls, he wrote as the Continental Army froze barefoot in the snow. Franklin himself might have scoffed at the drama, but the troops needed it. You picture George Washington reading those lines aloud by campfire boots, steaming beside him, soldiers nodding with tired eyes. That wasn't literature. That was fuel. But here's the twist. Paine didn't stop. He couldn't stop. After the war, while everyone else slipped into wigs and legislatures and respectable silence, Paine sailed off to stir another revolution, this time in France. He wrote The Rights of Man Defending the French Revolution when even Jefferson was raising an eyebrow. He championed the working poor, attacked organized religion, insulted half the crowned heads of Europe, was imprisoned, nearly executed. He survived, barely. And through it all, Franklin never quite reached out again. Maybe he was too old. Maybe he didn't agree with where Paine had gone. Maybe he was busy patching a fragile new nation. Or maybe he regretted lighting a fire he couldn't control. Historians still debate whether Franklin admired or feared what Paine became. You walk with Paine now, older, angrier, limping through the streets of Philadelphia after returning from France. He's broke, mocked, forgotten. He finds Franklin's grave, stares at it. No one records what he said. But you wonder, because it was Franklin who told him to go. Franklin who saw the ember. Franklin who cracked the door that led to everything else. And even if Franklin never endorsed every sentence Paine wrote, he knew that revolutions aren't made by safe men. Sometimes they're made by broke corset makers who write like they're on fire. And sometimes all it takes is a short letter, a 4-word sentence, a silent blessing. Go to America. The parlor smells like pipe smoke and lemon polish. A fire mutters in the grate. You sit back in a threadbare armchair, and Franklin's not here, at least not directly. But his spirit, oh, it's circling the room. Because tonight you're in the company of his favorite kind of people. The weird ones. You see, for all his civility and cleverness, Franklin was never drawn to the buttoned-up elites. He collected oddballs, craved eccentricity, preferred company that made no sense on paper. Men with wooden legs, dogs for best friends, secret languages, scandalous reputations, or just too many cats. And at the center of that constellation, Gouverneur Morris. Yes, Gouverneur. It's not a title, it's his actual name. He swaggered into the Constitutional Convention with a peg leg, a silver tongue, and no time for subtlety. He spoke more than anyone else in the room, over 170 times. He rewrote most of the final Constitution, and he was unapologetically wild. He lost his leg in a carriage accident, or possibly a misadventure while fleeing a jealous husband. Depends on who's telling the story. Either way, he wore his prosthetic like an accessory, a fashion statement, sometimes gold-tipped. Franklin found him hilarious. Then there was Charles Lee. You'd know him if you smelled him. He lived with dogs, literally, slept beside them, dined with them. Once wrote a letter of resignation from the Continental Army with paw prints along the margins. He was brilliant, erratic, and deeply suspicious of centralized authority. Naturally, Franklin invited him to dinner. And don't forget Hugh Williamson, physician, minister, philosopher, spy. He once conducted experiments to see how much pain a frog could endure while being electrocuted. You know, for science. Franklin read the paper and replied with notes in the margins. Fascinating, he wrote. Unpleasant, but fascinating. Franklin's social circle was not a hall of fame. It was a cabinet of curiosities, and he liked it that way. You lean over and examine a letter between Franklin and David Rittenhouse, an astronomer and clockmaker so obsessed with precision that he once wept while watching a planetary transit. Franklin sent him a homemade kaleidoscope and a note to remind you that the universe plays too. Then there was Dr. Ezra Stiles, who wrote Franklin asking what religion he believed in. Franklin replied, "As for Jesus of Nazareth, I have some doubts, but I shall know more soon." The honesty, so Franklin. But even in these exchanges, he sought connection. Not agreement, not echo chambers. He liked men who challenged him, provoked him, even offended him a little. You picture him at a table late night, a glass of wine in hand. Morris to his left monologuing about personal liberty. Lee at the window humming to his dogs. Rittenhouse sketching stars on the back of a napkin. Payne pacing, waving a page of Rights of Man like it's on fire. Franklin says little, just smiles and listens. He once told a friend, "You don't need everyone to agree. You just need the room not to explode." He wasn't building a circle of saints. He was building a web of minds. Because Franklin understood something we still forget. Progress doesn't come from uniformity. It comes from friction, from odd ideas, from difficult conversations between people who respect the tension more than their own egos. And so he gathered the oddballs, the misfits, the revolutionary misbehaviors, because they kept him sharp, kept him honest. Franklin liked being the calm one in the room full of storm clouds. He never needed to be the loudest, just the stillest, the listener, the one who turned noise into pattern. It's tempting to think of him as the wise old owl in the background. But that's only half the picture. He was also the instigator, the one who poured oil in the lamp and waited for the spark. You finish your tea. The fire's burning low. Outside wind scrapes the shutters like a memory. You swear you hear faint voices, a debate about taxes, a joke about frogs, a dog barking at absolutely nothing. And in the quiet, you realize Franklin wasn't afraid of weird. He cultivated it. Because to build something new, you need ideas that don't yet make sense, and people just brave or broken enough to share them. You wake up cold. Not uncomfortably, so just that kind of gentle chill that makes the tip of your nose tingle, and the sheets feel like they belong to someone else. You're in a quiet room, high ceilings, wooden shutters left slightly ajar. Outside, the air is sharp with frost. Inside, a window is cracked open on purpose. and somewhere in the house, Benjamin Franklin is still asleep. He'd call this an air bath. Yes, that's a real thing. Franklin believed that exposing one's naked body to cold air, especially in the morning, was not only invigorating, but essential for good health. He practiced it daily, strolling about his bedroom with the windows wide open, completely unclothed even in the winter, sometimes with tea, occasionally with a biscuit. You imagine this now, Franklin standing by the sill, arms crossed behind his back, pondering the density of fog as his breath coils around him. A servant enters, eyes forward, places a letter on the desk. Franklin nods, completely unbothered by the fact that he is in every sense of the word airing out. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about sleep. Franklin took sleep seriously, studied it, observed it, and occasionally ruined it for science. He was fascinated by how the body changed during slumber, how dreams interrupted reason, how rest could reset a man's entire disposition. He wrote, "Sleeping is the most agreeable of all employments, and it is the one I have always had the fewest objections to." He also believed people slept too much, or too little, or incorrectly. He experimented with segmented sleep, dividing the night into blocks of waking and dreaming with intervals for writing or reading. He believed in rising early, but also in napping midday. He advised others to listen to their own rhythms, not clocks. But then he also tried to redesign the clock. Seriously. He once proposed a new version of timekeeping that divided the day into 10 hours with 100 minutes each. No one adopted it, of course. But he enjoyed the math. He also calculated the savings America could achieve if everyone woke at dawn and used natural light. He argued that the resulting reduction in candle consumption would be revolutionary. People called it absurd. 2 centuries later, we called it daylight saving time. Franklin wasn't being cruel to the sleepy. He just believed we needed better rituals. He once published a pseudonymous essay titled An Economical Project, where he mockingly proposed firing cannons at sunrise to wake the city. He even suggested taxing window shutters and mandating church bells at odd hours. Was it satire? Probably. But buried in the laughter was a serious truth. How we sleep shapes how we live. And Franklin, he lived vividly. You walk with him one morning as he steps onto his back porch. There's snow on the railing. He traces a finger through it absent-mindedly. You ask if he's cold. He replies, "The body adjusts. The mind less so." His sleep routine is peculiar. He avoids heavy meals late at night, prefers a bit of milk or broth, always reads in bed even if it keeps him up too long. When he can't sleep, he writes. When he can sleep, he dreams often of flying. He believed dreams were echoes from another room of the soul. You peek into one of his journals and find scattered dream entries, walking on clouds, arguing with Aristotle, making love to a woman made entirely of candlelight. He never decoded them, just observed. He also avoided nightcaps, thought alcohol before bed was cheating the nervous system. "Let the body wind down," he wrote. "Don't pull the curtain too fast." He thought darkness was medicinal, stillness a teacher. But even Franklin had insomnia sometimes. He tried lavender, warm stones, silence. He even once slept with the window wide open during a hailstorm, convinced the noise would lull him. It didn't. But he said it was not altogether unpleasant. You sit now by the hearth as Franklin naps in the next room. You can hear the slow draw of his breath, The occasional mutter. He dreams aloud, talks to names you don't recognize. Once he laughs softly, then curls into the blanket like a child. You feel time stretch. There's something sacred about the sleep of a man who built cities. He wasn't afraid of it, didn't try to outwork it. He honored it, scheduled it, studied it, and somewhere deep in his spirit, he understood sleep is not escape, it's realignment. Franklin was not a mystic, not a monk, but he believed in the practical soul, and to him sleep was its workshop. You settle deeper into the chair, warmth rising through your spine. You understand now why he refused the presidency. You understand why he never rushed, and why, even in his final years, he left his window open just a crack, so the night air could remind him that the world was still out there, still cold, still alive. The candle burns low. You sit across from Franklin again. Older, now thinner, his hands quieter than they used to be. He's not writing tonight, just watching the flame flicker. There's a page open on the desk, but the ink has dried in the pen. He doesn't seem to mind. The page is blank except for a simple heading at the top, the 13 virtues. You've heard of them. Maybe you read them in school once, scrawled on a poster nestled between Franklin quotes and grainy sketches of bifocals. But tonight, the list feels different. Because Franklin didn't write it for you. He wrote it for himself. He was 20 years old when he made it, a young man full of ambition, with too many opinions and a tendency to talk over people. So he crafted a system, a set of guardrails for a better life. 13 virtues, not commandments, not laws, just aspirations. He wanted to be temperate, eat, not to dullness, drink, not to elevation. He wanted to be silent, speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. He wanted to be orderly, let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. He listed industry, sincerity, justice, moderation, cleanliness, tranquility, chastity, and humility. Especially humility. Franklin once admitted that he included humility mostly as a joke at first. Imitate Jesus and Socrates, he wrote, half chuckling, knowing full well how ridiculous it sounded. But the joke wore off. The practice didn't. He created a small grid, a table with the virtues listed on one side and days of the week along the top. Each time he violated a virtue, he'd make a small black mark. His goal was to go a full week without any marks in one category, then move on to the next. A rotating cycle of improvement, like a game of spiritual whack-a-mole. And he failed. Constantly. Especially at order. I could never master order, he wrote later. My papers, my room, my time, they all resisted neatness. He laughed at himself, but he never stopped trying. That's the part people miss. Franklin didn't expect perfection. He just wanted motion, improvement, reflection, a way to measure his soul as carefully as he measured the temperature of the air. You glance down at the blank page now. The list is gone, burned into memory, and you wonder, what would your own virtues look like? Would you include patience, grace, the ability to let go of things that no longer serve you? Franklin wasn't trying to become a saint. He was trying to become aware. He even admitted that mastering one virtue often caused him to trip over another. Being proud of my humility, he once wrote, was one of my finest failures. He never published the system during his life. It wasn't until decades later in his autobiography that he shared it. Quietly, without fanfare. not as a lecture, not as a revelation, just as a personal note in the margins of a life. And it struck a nerve, because it wasn't divine, it was doable. Even now, hundreds of years later, you can find journals based on his grid, self-help books tracing lineage back to that table, modern software with digital black marks, and somewhere someone's still muttering, "Eat not to dullness," while staring at a third slice of cake. But Franklin's system wasn't rigid. He evolved with it. Over time, he softened on chastity, clarified justice, reworded tranquility. Because that's what real self-improvement is: a moving target, not a goal, a habit of returning. You close the notebook and watch Franklin slowly rise from his chair. His back creaks, his knees murmur, but his eyes are steady. He doesn't say much tonight, just points to the window. And as the night air spills in cool and certain, you realize something: Franklin didn't build a nation by being flawless. He built it by being self-aware, by realizing that character is less about what we declare and more about what we notice, what we measure, what we quietly try to do better tomorrow. Even if we fail, especially when we fail. So tonight, as you lie back and let the darkness curl around your shoulders, ask yourself not who you want to be, but what small thing you're willing to change. That's the Franklin way. Try, fail, adjust, laugh, sleep, then try again. You smell butter, warm, crisp, golden. And somewhere beyond that, a crackle, perhaps firewood, perhaps laughter. You're not in Philadelphia anymore. No powdered wigs here, no stilted declarations. Just a quiet little street in Paris sun sliding between awnings and a man arguing passionately about breakfast. Benjamin Franklin standing at a market stall, waving a slice of toasted bread dipped in egg. Pain Perdue, he says, with a gleam in his eye, or as I've decided to call it, French toast. You blink. He grins. Now, did Benjamin Franklin really invent French toast? Almost certainly not. But that never stopped him from claiming something. You see, there's an apocryphal tale, never quite confirmed, never quite debunked, that Franklin, during his diplomatic stay in France, introduced a version of egg-soaked fried bread to a salon of nobles. Some said it was peasant food. Others called it delightful. Franklin simply shrugged and said, "Anything is noble when done slowly and with butter." He had a point. But the breakfast debate was never really about bread. It was about perspective. Franklin loved blurring the line between the refined and the rustic. He wore fur hats to royal audiences. He answered political letters with bad puns. He insisted that intellectual conversation should never exclude a bottle of wine or a plate of something delicious. And so we find ourselves back at the table, in France. Late morning, the window is open. A violinist plays on the street below, and Franklin, now in his late 70s, is lecturing a room of Parisian philosophers about how to properly prepare a morning meal. Butter, yes, but never too hot. Stale bread is acceptable, encouraged even. Time, he explains, is flavor. Someone mentions adding cinnamon. He raises a brow. Are we baking or conversing? They all laugh. Franklin takes another bite and continues seamlessly into a critique of currency reform and the philosophy of happiness. Because of course he does. This was his genius, turning breakfast into diplomacy, turning toast into metaphor, taking the moment seriously but not solemnly. You sip a warm drink now, letting the room fade slightly, letting the story shimmer. This is a lighter chapter, but don't mistake it for fluff. Franklin used food as a bridge. He once joked that nothing bound nations better than shared hunger, that a bottle uncorked in mutual confusion was the beginning of real friendship. He dined with dukes and with beggars, and often preferred the latter, at least they weren't performing. He also believed that the best diplomacy happened after dessert. He wrote often of how meals lowered defenses and loosened tongues. In one letter to a colleague, he said, "If you wish to learn a man's truth, feed him well, give him wine, and let him forget he is supposed to impress you." It worked. In Versailles, he would sometimes arrive with a dish instead of a dispatch. He once smuggled Philadelphia molasses into a Parisian tart. The nobles, unsure whether it was offensive or brilliant, ate it anyway, and within days funding for supplies doubled. Franklin called it culinary persuasion, and as for pain perdu, lost bread, he adored the phrase. Lost bread, he said, is bread remembered. He turned the name into a metaphor for aging, for ideas past their prime, for things you thought were wasted but just needed a little egg and time. He wrote a letter to a young friend once, musing that all of life was stale bread, waiting for the right heat to become delicious again. He even proposed serving French toast at civic meetings. If the people are to debate liberty, he wrote, let them do it over something warm, crusty, and modestly sweet. You smile. You can almost taste it now. Crisp on the edges, soft in the middle. A little messy, perfect, like Franklin himself. Outside, church bells chime the quarter hour. You imagine him finishing his toast, brushing crumbs from his coat, and standing slowly. Well, he says, time to convince a monarchy to fund a rebellion. And off he goes. But not before one final note. He scribbles something on the back of a receipt and tucks it into his pocket. The words, "Joy requires butter." You'll never know if it was meant as a recipe or a proverb. But either way, it's Franklin. And that's enough. You're walking along a narrow lane early spring in Philadelphia. The cobblestones are damp. Rainwater trickles in the gutter beside you. There's no fanfare, no carriages, no armed guards lining the streets, just quiet footsteps, a faint creak of shutters, the smell of bread rising slowly in nearby kitchens. But something's wrong. The usual spark in the city feels dimmed because Benjamin Franklin has died. Not violently, not suddenly, not tragically, but entirely. It's April 17th, 1790. He was 84 years old. And for most people, he had always been there. The man with the pen, the man with the lamp, the man who never stopped walking, writing, inventing, smiling, urging. To lose Franklin is to lose the sound of a clock that's been ticking behind every conversation for decades. News spreads quietly at first. A printer tells a tailor. A servant tells her neighbor. A boy overhears and shouts it down a muddy alley. He's gone, he says. Old Ben is gone. No one asks Ben who everyone knows. By nightfall, it's on every lip. And by morning, something truly rare happens. The city stops. You walk with the crowd, an ocean of black coats and gray bonnets drifting down Arch Street toward Christ Church burial ground. You're not alone, not by a long shot. Estimates range wildly, but at least 20,000 people come to pay their respects. That's more than half the population of Philadelphia. They come with umbrellas, with walking sticks, with carriages that jam intersections for blocks. People climb rooftops. Some weep. Some whisper. Some just stand there, hats in hand, as if waiting for him to sit up and deliver one last joke about taxes and lighting. Among them are freedmen, artisans, diplomats, farmers, teachers, former enemies, children he funded, widows he advised, men who once argued with him for hours and now find themselves hollowed out with grief. You don't hear speeches, not yet. You hear shoes, thousands of them, and behind them something else, silence. Franklin didn't request anything elaborate. His will was simple. No long eulogies, no brass bands, no statues or horse-drawn spectacles. Just a box, just a patch of earth, and his gravestone. It reads Benjamin and Deborah Franklin. That's it. No founding father, no genius of the age, not even president, which of course he never was. Just names. Together, in stone, beneath a city he helped build from dust and lantern light. You kneel by the grave. The stone is low, almost easy to miss. It's weathered now, cracked faintly at the corners. People have begun the ritual, tossing pennies onto the surface. It started small, then grew. A nod to poor Richard. A penny saved. Today there are hundreds, and still you feel like that's not enough. Because this grave holds more than a man. It holds an idea. Franklin didn't invent the American dream, but he made it feel possible. A boy with 17 siblings who never finished school, who ran away, reinvented himself, and kept doing it over and over. A printer who shaped a country. A diplomat who charmed empires. A tinkerer who rewrote time. A writer who never wasted a sentence. And now just a patch of earth. Quiet, modest, dusty. You stay a while? A small group passes by. One woman clutches a baby, muttering, "He taught me to read." A man nearby whispers, "He helped fund my apprenticeship." Another says nothing, just touches the stone and walks away. It's not about what Franklin did for the nation. It's what he did for people. And that's what you begin to see now. Not the fireworks of legacy, but the candlelight of continuity. You retrace your steps through the streets he walked, past the firehouse, the post office, the library. A child drops a letter into a box with Franklin's name still etched above it. He didn't name these places after himself. The city did, but he would have chuckled at that. Because Franklin never believed names mattered, only results. That something worked. That someone learned. That a letter arrived on time or a lamp stayed lit in the fog. He wasn't chasing immortality. He was building systems. And now, even with his body beneath the ground, those systems continue. That's the quiet miracle. You duck into the old print shop. It's smaller than you thought. The air still carries ink even after all these years. A volunteer explains how Franklin used to sleep on the floor here when work went late. That he once offered a printing apprenticeship in exchange for 3 chickens and a cart of oats. You chuckle. Of course he did. A boy walks in with his mother, points to a picture of Franklin on the wall and asks, "Is that the man who made the library?" She nods. That's legacy. Not carved in marble, but passed in whispers on field trips and bedtime stories and sidewalk pennies. You step outside. The sky is overcast. A wind moves through the streets like a thought that hasn't settled yet. And you remember something Franklin once said, "If you would not be forgotten as soon as you are dead, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing." He did both, over and over. Not to be remembered, but because he couldn't help it. Because his fingers itched when ideas lingered. Because his brain stirred when cities slept. Because he believed that silence properly arranged could become music. So today the city walks slower, not from sadness, but from reverence. And in every open window, every dry letter, every flickering lantern, Franklin breathes a little still. You've stayed by the grave longer than you expected. The stone has cooled in the afternoon shade, and the pennies gleam dully, tiny offerings to a man who never demanded them. But now you rise and step back into the city. Philadelphia has changed, but it hasn't forgotten. As you walk through streets Franklin once paced in silence or debate, you begin to notice something strange. His absence has shape, like the negative space where a sculpture once stood. It's not emptiness, it's echo. That's when the tributes begin. First in the papers. Obituaries pour in not just from local printers but from across the world. France declares 3 days of mourning. The French National Assembly, in the midst of its own revolution, stands in solemn tribute. Mirabeau calls him a genius who freed America and enlightened the human race. Paris churches toll their bells. London newspapers print his last essays, even the ones that had once mocked him. A letter arrives from Thomas Jefferson, written in that fine slanted script, reading, "No one can replace him. I fear no one ever will." Jefferson, who had grown from Franklin's shadow, now finds the shadow comforting. Even George Washington, stoic and reserved, sends a message of respect. He was indeed great. But Franklin wouldn't have wanted statues. He would have asked, "Do the lanterns still work?" You visit his home one last time, what's left of it. There's a garden where the foundation once stood, filled now with the rustling sound of school children on tour. They listen distracted, but curious as a guide speaks about the Junto. You'd forgotten about that. Franklin founded the Junto Club when he was in his early 20s, a group of tradesmen, thinkers, and tinkerers who met every Friday to discuss ideas and solve problems. No aristocrats, no titles, just citizens. It was revolutionary. They debated public hygiene, literacy, lending libraries, volunteer patrols, street signage, everything from philosophy to potholes. Franklin believed knowledge was a shared civic responsibility. And now that same model is replicated in book clubs, neighborhood associations, TED Talks, open-source coding communities. Franklin didn't invent conversation. He simply reminded people how to use it. And that idea that an ordinary person could better the world with nothing but ideas and others to share them with, that's still breathing. You pass Independence Hall. Somewhere inside the same chair Franklin once studied still waits. The one with the half-sun carved into the back. Is it a rising or setting sun, he had asked. He answered it on the last day of the convention, rising. That optimism wasn't naive. It was chosen. Franklin saw how fragile the Republic was, how selfish men could become, how quickly power could be hoarded. And still he bet on collaboration. He bet on people. And now we live inside that bet. But the contradictions linger. You enter a small exhibit. The plaque reads, "Franklin and Slavery." He owned slaves, freed them, spoke against slavery, published abolitionist tracts, but profited from the labor early in his life. You feel the contradiction like a cold draft. He evolved, yes, but slowly, perhaps too slowly. The man who wrote so eloquently of liberty was complicit for decades. Historians still argue how to frame this. Franklin himself admitted that moral clarity arrived late. His final public act, signing a petition to Congress urging the abolition of slavery, it was ignored. But the document exists. His signature shaky, slightly smudged, rests beneath the call for justice, as if even in his last breaths he was trying to rebalance his own scales. Legacy is rarely clean, and Franklin's was never meant to be. He didn't ask to be remembered as flawless. He asked to be remembered as honest. You step outside into late afternoon. You hear a brass band rehearsing near the park. Franklin might have preferred a string quartet or silence, but he would have smiled, especially if they were slightly off-key. He once wrote, "The noblest question in the world is, what good may I do in it?" He never stopped asking that. And the city, centuries later, still answers. Street lamps glow where there were once shadows. Libraries stand where once stood nothing. Ideas flourish in meeting halls, classrooms, barbershops, and basements. You realize something just before dusk. Franklin is buried. But he was never buried. He was seeded. And everything growing around you, now ideas, systems, freedoms, questions, is proof that he still takes root. He's in the way we file taxes, the way we debate laws, the way we challenge each other to do better, be better. He's in the child who reads by lantern, the teacher who explains friction using a kite string, the elder who says, "Let's solve this together," instead of "let someone else handle it." He's not the ghost in the room. He's the reason there is a room. You watch the sky turn violet, the old city soaked in quiet. And as the first stars blink into view, you wonder, was it a rising sun, Ben, or just light borrowed from the next day? The sky darkens slowly over Philadelphia. No dramatic sunset. No final trumpet blast. Just the quiet dimming of a day that meant something. You sit now in the space between remembrance and legacy. A pause. A breath. And it leads you to one last question. Why did Franklin say no to power? You've been circling it for hours, for days, through stories of fires and friendships, print shops and parliaments, Parisian breakfasts and thunderclaps. The question has haunted the corners of every candlelit room. Why would a man of such genius, of such stature, of such influence refuse to rule? The simple answer is age. But Franklin had refused power before his hair grayed, before his joints ached, before his eyesight blurred at night. It wasn't age. It was conviction. You begin, as always, with paper. In his writings, Franklin spoke often of public service, but he meant something different from office or title. To him, public service was what you did for others, not what you were called. Not a position, but a posture. Power, in his view, should never be sought. It should only be accepted reluctantly and relinquished the moment it becomes self-serving. He once wrote to a friend, "He who seeks office is rarely fit to hold it." And Franklin was very fit indeed. So he never sought it. But there's more. Because Franklin understood power. Deeply, he had held it influence in Europe's sway and Congress command, in committee leverage in negotiations. He'd written laws, brokered treaties, advised presidents, drafted constitutions. He knew what power could do, and he knew what it could undo. He'd seen men warped by it, saw pride turn cooperation into gridlock, watched once humble statesmen strut like kings the moment their names hit parchment. Franklin didn't hate these men. He pitied them. He believed that a republic could only survive if its greatest minds refused to see themselves as its rulers. So he gave his influence away. He shaped things, then stepped back. You think now of that famous chair, the one in Independence Hall, the half-sun carved into the backrest. He stared at it for weeks, months, a sun on the horizon. Was it rising or setting at the signing of the Constitution? He finally spoke. I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. And then he smiled. He always smiled. Not out of smugness, but out of relief. Because the Republic, for all its flaws, was not dependent on him. It had become something more than one mind. It had become a conversation, a shared breath, a living debate. He had helped build it, but he didn't need to run it. And that was the difference. Franklin understood what very few great men understand, that walking away at the right moment is not cowardice. It is grace. You look now at some of his final essays, one titled, On the Dangers of Power. In it, he warns that when power becomes permanent, it breeds laziness in citizens and arrogance in leaders. Let the highest office be temporary, he wrote. Let the people remember that they are not subjects, but sovereigns. Even in his last years, even with gout and grief gnawing at him, he was still writing about limits, about boundaries, because that's where liberty lives. Not in unchecked authority, but in carefully drawn lines. And then there's the matter of humor. Franklin knew how to disarm power with laughter. In one speech, when tempers flared at the convention, he stood and said, "We must all hang together, or we shall most assuredly hang separately." It broke the room. He didn't seek to dominate. He sought to disperse tension. He was a cooling breeze in rooms that burned too hot. And perhaps that's the most subversive form of leadership. Not commanding, but calming. You visit his letters to Washington, to Adams, to Jefferson. He never begged for appointments, never demanded tribute, never suggested his own name for office. Instead, he encouraged them to lead. And when they stumbled, as they all did, he offered criticism laced with kindness, correction wrapped in stories. He didn't need to be president. He had already done the work of one without the sash, without the salary, without the statue. You walk down another corridor of memory now. A letter from a French diplomat after Franklin's death says he refused power so gracefully, we almost wished he had taken it just to show us how gentle power could be. Gentle power. What a concept. That you could lead with humility. That you could influence through restraint. That you could build a nation not with commands, but with curiosity. And yes, there were critics. Even Franklin had them. They said he was unserious, too playful, not decisive enough. He answered with another essay, and another invention, and another quietly funded project for poor apprentices. He didn't argue with the critics. He outlasted them. Because in the end, the most powerful thing he ever did was step back and trust that the ideas would hold without him. And they did. And they do. Even now. You step back into the present moment. The room still. The world changed. And that question remains, what would you do with power? Franklin's answer, refuse it. Then help someone else prepare for it. The fire has burned low now. The room is hushed. There's a softness to the air, like everything's been wrapped in wool. You sit still, feeling the weight of it, the story, the legacy, the strange and stubborn grace of a man who could have had everything and chose to let go. This final part isn't loud. It's not supposed to be. Because Franklin never needed a curtain call. He didn't need monuments or parades or marble columns bearing his name. He needed time, paper, a warm fire, a question to ponder, and a quiet place to disappear. He believed in the afterlife, yes, but he believed more in after effects. the small ripples of usefulness that continued when the man was gone, the systems that outlived the inventor, the essays still quoted by people who don't know who wrote them. He often compared himself to a book. His epitaph, originally drafted by himself decades earlier, read, "The Body of B. Franklin Printer." Like the cover of an old book, its contents torn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding. Lies here food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, appear once more in a new and more perfect edition, corrected and amended by the author. That epitaph was never used, but it lingers, doesn't it? Because it wasn't just about faith. It was about revision. Franklin believed in second drafts, in improvements, in returning to something not because it was wrong, but because it could be better. He lived that way. He governed that way. He died that way. And maybe if you listen closely, you'll hear the real wisdom in it, that nothing is final. Not a mistake. Not a presidency unclaimed. Not a life. Even now, the world edits Franklin. Each generation rediscovers him, sometimes through curiosity, sometimes through criticism. They pick through his flaws, his genius, his contradictions, and still he holds. Because he was never trying to be a man of marble. He was trying to be useful. He once said, "When you are finished changing, you are finished." He never was. He changed himself, changed the systems, changed the tone of conversations. He brought light, literal light, to streets, but also figurative light to debates, to science, to civic life. Not with shouting, with nudges, with inventions, with jokes, with essays written after midnight by candlelight between spoonfuls of broth and quiet curses at gout. And in the very end, when asked if he had made peace with God, he replied, "I have not thought it necessary to busy myself much about it. But I suppose I shall soon enough." The humor, the peace, the shrug. That's Franklin. He never reached for immortality, but he became it accidentally, humbly, almost unwillingly, because he did the small things well, and trusted they would become something big. And they did. They became a nation. They became habits. They became questions we still ask today. Can I be better? What do I owe my community? How do I disagree without destroying? What, if anything, is worth printing on a blank page? You lean back now. Let your eyes close. Franklin has left the room. He left it cleaner than he found it. He left notes. He left tools. He left laughter folded inside letters that still make people pause and smile. And he left the door open behind him, so you could follow. Not into office, but into service. Not into perfection, but into persistence. And as the fire fades into coals and the wind turns pages on an empty desk, one last phrase rises from the dark like a whisper from behind the parchment. You don't need to rule the world. You just need to improve it. The room is almost dark now. Only the faintest shimmer of light remains. Maybe from the embers in the fire, or perhaps from something softer, the kind of light that memory leaves behind when it no longer needs to be seen. You let the story dissolve around you. You're no longer following Franklin through busy streets or waiting with him in quiet studies. You're simply resting inside a life once lived with thoughtfulness, wit, and care. The chair creaks gently as you lean back just a little more. The room seems to expand with your breath. There's no more to chase, no more to learn tonight. The page has turned, And even as the world outside continues the traffic, the clocks, the names and headlines here in this little space we've shared it all feels so very still. You're allowed to let go now. Franklin has gone quiet. The ink is dry. The windows are closed. And the night has taken its shape. So just breathe. Let your eyes become heavy. Let the thoughts slow down. Let the story float away. You don't have to remember it all. You only have to feel safe. Here. Now. And if you're still listening, gently now. Good night.